Wonderful God, bless this conversation. Let more happen here than I or we who are part of this class are putting in. Be with us and help to advance us in our faith and in our knowledge. This we pray through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Eric's not with us. So the idea for this class was mine, and Eric and I wanted to work together, and we still want to work together. And so we have another class, I think, on Ecclesiastes coming up. And so we'll see how that works. But for me, I have had a personal awakening to the importance of creation in biblical faith, and have that may not, I would imagine that if I heard that first 10 years ago, I would have thought, big deal. I mean, but I've come to recognize, and I'm agreeing. Hey, Katie, how are you? Why don't you sit right here?
Oh.
You okay?
I'm sorry, I just thought there was somebody there.
So, hey,
Come on in.
Jill's here. What I've learned about creation just opens up a very, very large, new, fresh, and exciting vista on Christian faith, on the nature of God, the nature of the world for me. And to discover this after this, what set me about this hunt was a crisis when I really came to grips with the fact of climate change, and thought, oh my gosh, I'm scared, really, and climate scientists are scared. And I had just finished a career of being a minister for 40 years, and it's like this was not on the agenda to deal with. Now we're all going to go extinct. No. I got to deal with this. So and I found myself, I think, providentially in a very good position to undertake such a search. And anyway, I've come to learn about and continue to learn more and more about creation and how important creation is through the Bible. So we have Genesis, and then we have Exodus. And what's happening in the Bible is that Exodus, turns out that once you're aware of what's going on with creation, turns out that Exodus absolutely bristles with creation themes. It's like I'd never seen this before. And so this is coming in living color and so on. And that's the idea of what I wanted to talk about here. So this is kind of a Doug invention. It's something I'm excited. Hey, Paul, it's something I'm excited about, and so on. And I'm just pleased that you're here and giving me a chance to try to get you all excited about this as well. So I decided to set up, ultimately, I would like to talk about the idea of wilderness. Wilderness is a big deal in the Old Testament. It spans, Israel is in the wilderness for most of the book of Exodus. And, they get out of Egypt, and then they have the crossing of the Red Sea. Boom, they're in the wilderness, and they remain in the wilderness until they 40 years, and they until they come back into the promised land across the Jordan. So that's several books long, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, supposedly, and then in Joshua they go into the land. So that's a lot of time in the sandbox, and I'm seeing a lot of creational themes in that. So I want to review a couple of these creational ideas, things that we've touched upon in previous classes here, but I want to underscore them as a way of preparing our eyes to see freshly what's going on in the wilderness that's so is so much bristles with creation. And the first idea, we never articulated it, but I've learned about it, and it's very helpful, is what I would call, and scholars call it this, act and consequence. Act and consequence. You know, we know from nature that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So we think of billiard balls on the, on the pool table, and so on. The idea of act and consequence. Hey, come right in.
I have a guest that would like to, I think he would enjoy being in your class.
I hope you're right. Yeah.
Young theologian got me into here and taught me a lot about theology and Y2us. And you said something about covenant theology.
I'm not sure where that came from, but keep talking.
It means
It's
right.
creation theology.
Creation theology.
Yeah.
well, it's I'm interested.
Thank you, Ron. Please have a seat. You're
Yeah.
welcome here.
Welcome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay, so act in consequence, that is the idea that the scriptures assume that when the world was created, that human behavior, God's behavior, all has something will happen as a result of that behavior. It's somewhat like the physical world before Newton came along, and they were more aware of what was going on. Just remember that when things happen in the world, there's some kind of consequence. So another principle that's there is the idea that which God created is an interrelated whole. So creation doesn't equate to nature, but it includes nature. So in the second chapter of Genesis, we have four principal actors, which the Bible presents to us as representing the created order, the heavens and the earth, and that they would be humanity, they would be God, they would be the animals, and then the ground. The ground could be everything from the dust of the ground to the ground that you have crops in, to the planets, the earth, the whole thing. So those four entities, and they are interrelated. So as the Bible presents them to us, is that each of the four actors in this relationship have a responsibility to each of the other actors in that relationship. So we can go and we read about these again in the second chapter. This is a review, but I'll characterize what you'll find there when you go back there. Humanity, for example, is drawn by God, the creator, out of the ground. So that's the source of our being. But humanity also tills the ground. And that is emphasized in the word for tilling is not so much an agricultural word in the Bible. It really should be, or is helpfully translated as serves the ground. So humanity serves the ground out of which humanity was drawn. Men, women, individuals, you and me, and humanity as a whole. So we have this dual relationship. We have a relationship with God and God with us. We have a relationship as humans with the animals, right? We were assigned to name the animals. And so we have some extra, hey, come on over. Welcome.
I know, just.
Okay. So we have a relationship with the animals, and they have a relationship with us. They are our, remember, they're our friends. You just have to look at Disney's Finding Nemo, and the shark's in therapy, right? And fish are our friends, not our food. So that we have a relationship with animals, with God, and so there is this sort of network. interrelatedness about the created order, which then leads me to another idea. You have act and consequence, then you have the interrelatedness of the created order, and what results in that is something that goes throughout the entire Bible, and that is that things that happen in one sphere of the creation, a sphere that may not seem to be related to another sphere, actually is related to another sphere. So if you have to put, the Bible is very keen on this one aspect, and that is, if you have a disturbance in the moral order, then you have a disturbance in the ground, or with the animals, or with other humans. And this is laid out schematically in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
You sure you're not talking about Washington DC?
Well, this is why we're in this class, is because this begins to cast a light, and it's supposed to cast a light on the world we live in. So you're going to begin to hear comparisons all the time. I just walked up and said, Susan's sermon today, it's like, oh, I could have been a color commentator on Susan's sermon, which is a problem that ministers have. and said a lot. Did you hear her?
Not
hear her?
yet.
Okay, well, you'll see what I'm saying.
Now that you said that, we're
You'll
looking forward.
yeah,
to it.
okay, good, yeah. So so a disturbance in the moral order creates a disturbance in the natural order. Oh, you look like you're gonna say something.
Well, she disavowed the fact that that's necessarily judgmental.
Well, that you're right. Say more.
So, and we had a full moon eclipse this week. We may not realize it, but it does affect us. It does affect our planets.
Yes.
We live in the natural order, and there is effect from the heavens as well as here.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily direct predestination kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
I had the feeling as I was listening, I thought I had a revelation. I thought, is God also evolutionary? Is he evolving as well?
We've talked about that.
And if that's the case, then this concept that I grew up at in the Baptist church, God is a fixed figure with defined rules and regulations.
Right.
Certainly on this. That's my thought.
Well-
You are so jumping ahead.
Before you go too far though, I grew up in a Baptist church too, and we were obviously at opposite ends of the spectrum. It was
Well, I was Baptist general.
I was Southern.
Oh, there's a big difference.
Well, there's going to be an Arminian trend in the Baptist church, and there's going to be a Calvinist trend in the
Oh, yeah.
Baptist
Mm.
in the Baptist church.
Part of us are gonna come from the Anabaptists and the rest of us are just gonna be radical.
Aren't we
But
all?
But back to your creation.
you've gone to judgment. That's an important concept, and what that is. I'd like to make a statement on that today, or to put something on the table. You've gone to the nature of God, and so on. So, and that's really the point of all of this. I think that this kind of thinking, working out of the scriptures and working with these themes, feeds into it feeds into an open and relational theological outlook, or a process theological outlook. And those terms, let's just let those go. We'll get to that, not in this class, but we will get to that, because that's a big thing. So you want to say something?
Yes, I probably may have covered this in previous classes, but when God said he created, I made all of creation in 6 days, it's not necessarily 6 regular literal days. Remember, a day to the Lord is like 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 years to us.
Mhm.
And furthermore, if you notice, first he created light, and then the earth, and then the seas, and then the land, and then the sea creatures, then all the land creatures, before finally creating us humans. And that's actually also what happened in reality. First, there were sea creatures before there were land creatures. There was oceans before there was land. There was the sun and light before there was earth. Amazing how that actually parallels very well with what scientists have found and concluded.
Well, that first chapter, thank you for that. That first chapter of Genesis, we want to hold that in our minds. I'm working out of the second chapter, which is coming from, is a slightly different tradition, and at some level harmonizes with what you've just shared with us. But so where I'm going is that we begin to see this the character of the influences that happen in the second chapter, when we see there's a disturbance. And without getting into an elaborate discussion of the Garden of Eden situation and the entrance of disobedience and anti-creational behavior on the part of the humans there, there's a disturbance between certainly the humans, the man and the woman in the garden, and God, the creator, who appears as a character in the story, and in the natural world, the earth, the ground itself in that. And then you move to the consequences. And I'd like us to write the consequences when there's that list of supposedly bad things that happen to the man and the woman. The snake, for example, has to crawl on its belly, and the man and the woman who have found themselves due to their disobedience or mistrust of God, however you want to, and then the legal disobedience of actually eating the fruit, and so on. They find that there's some kind of separation between the humans themselves, which comes under the metaphor of they're seeing each other as naked and want to cover up, and so on. What I'd like to observe about that is that those consequences are both what we might call natural consequences. They might be as a result of human activity, and there's a dual kind of influence. Is that there's the human influence accounts for that, and there's the influence of God. Now, be generous with me, because I'm having difficulty myself explaining this, but what I'm moving towards is an idea that I find revolutionary, and to discover this after retirement is disconcerting to be sure. But I'm beginning to wonder if God punishes, or if punishment is really the natural consequence of our disobedience, anti-creational behavior. Sin is often used as the word, and so on. So, for example, the humans, there's a negative thing that happens, is that they want to cover up. They're not as the intimacy between the two of them is disturbed in some way, and so now they claw after the fig leaves, which is also comes up in the sermon today, but not as interestingly as it does here. And so there's yes.
So traditionally, I looked at and it was presented to me as judgment to be before you. But the question, as I thought in relationship to the sermon as I was listening this morning, was, is this evolution? It took 2 generations of people for the first generation that didn't get to go to Israel was not ready to go to Israel.
Right.
They had observed all the mercy, the miracles of God in Israel, crossing the sea, etc., and they still didn't get it. So 2 generations later, finally, all of that is gone. It's now tradition,
Mhm.
but they are now ready to move into.
Right. And where I'm at in the development of these ideas is that I'm talking about the Garden of Eden to bring out some principles which will be recapitulated in the plagues, in the plague situation, and then recapitulated again in the wilderness situation, and possibly recapitulated again in the 10 Commandments, and then all through the Bible. So do you see what I'm saying? I mean, you're hearing the implications of where I'm trying to go. So, you know, that's, I want to talk about what happened in the wilderness, but I'm trying to say something about the consequences of the people's sin as being natural consequences and attributed to God.
Well, Sue, in the sermon today, and this is post-Christ as opposed to pre-Christ and evolution, is that there's not this direct core. Evil doesn't happen to people because of their nature of being evil. It happens because it happens.
Well, that's the if then, that's the act and the consequence.
Yeah,
That's
consequence.
it's an evolutionary given. If you hit enough people in the nose, somebody's going to swing back.
Brownian
Or
motion.
if you release the toxins into the air, somebody's going to get sick.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, do animals sin?
That's a question that's being freshly considered in the last 5 years. And probably, I don't know, what do you think?
Well, is every consequence a sin? Not necessarily.
That's an interesting question too, because is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
consequence equate to the sin? And an idea that I'm working on is that the sin itself equates to the consequence, is the consequence.
You have a pot of water.
Yeah.
And it boils. And it, I'm out of my realm, just enough physics to be a sophomore. That there's such a thing called Brownian motion, where
Yep.
everything is in
Yep.
motion all the time.
Yeah.
And if you're part of that pot of water, you're gonna get bumped by something. It may be a tiny bump at the end or off to the side, but you're in there. And I think that's where we all are today. We're all in the same boat, essentially. And when one person moves, eventually there's going to be a movement someplace else.
So, a way of it's hard not to think scientifically about this, because we know a great deal about the world through science, especially in our generation, science and technology. I keep in my mind, this is just a suggestion, you can adopt this or not. There's scientific truth. And if it qualifies to be true and provable and repeatable and meeting those scientific standards, then it's true in my mind. There is revealed truth. I try to keep them separate.
But they're patterns nevertheless. And that's what I'm talking
Well, the
about.
patterns we see certainly in nature, and then I'm trying to talk about a pattern
Right.
here, but I'm working in the revealed mode right now.
Mhm.
And I'm what I'm trying to persuade you all to do is to let's leave the scientific mode let's pay attention to simply the revealed mode for the moment. Ultimately, we got to get the two talking to each other because we live in both
Right.
modes.
I guess for me, sometimes being able to visualize something. Because I really don't have any problem with this. And I was just reading in First Corinthians, the wisdom of the wise is not what God's looking for.
Right.
And it's the foolishness of the cross is really, which is a consequence of not paying attention to God's word.
Right. Well, all of that would be in the area of revealed truth.
Right.
Yeah, so it was interesting that Susan said, what did Jesus say to the people who were in distress about suffering? And Jesus calls upon them basically to repent.
Mhm.
That fits with what I'm trying to say. So it's like, well, maybe Jesus was on to creation as much as we are in this class. Who knows?
You think?
But I found that really interesting because, and that's why that's so doggone difficult to interpret.
So is wrath God, what we call God's wrath, the plague, okay?
Well, now don't tell anybody that you learned that from me
No,
here, because they're not going to let you.
Is God's wrath perhaps really just the natural order because of something that we did?
I don't use the word natural, but I would say the consequence. The consequence.
Okay, the
Get in the
act and the
revealed mode.
consequence, revealed mode.
Yeah.
So we didn't do something. And as a result of our negligence, this is what happened.
Right.
And you can
What are you
call it,
thinking of?
you can call it God's wrath, but the fact of the matter is, God told us throughout the Old Testament, especially Jews, don't do these things because if you do, these things will happen.
Like what?
Immorality.
Okay.
Let's see. What did he say that just
When you get to the prophets, and the prophets are struggling with what's going on in their society, with the kings are corrupt, and the people are greedy, and the poor are being abused. And in the poetry of the prophets, you'll run into a passage where it will talk about the land has died, and that the desert the land has become arid, and there's no rain. And in other words, the moral problem that they see is manifesting itself on the ground there. It also manifests itself on the fact that the people are overrun by these bigger empires with their big military. Is that the belief in the prophetic mind, which I think the Old Testament is consistent in its theology. I think they're coming out of a creational theology here. In the prophetic mind, the Babylonian armies overrunning the people are a result of the fundamental injustice and corruption and cruelty of the society, which is mostly driven by its leaders. Is that those ills are resulting?
that was the result.
That was the consequence.
You've obviously been preaching from the prophets. I'm trying to remember.
Well, I just like to point out, it's this constant cycle of first we obey God's word, and then we start sinning, getting to this depraved and greed, and then things happen. Then we'll be like, okay, we'll stop. And then as the prophets want us to remind us, get back on the path. and then the cycle repeats. This just happens every,
One of the things, a deep insight of the Old Testament prophets is that chastisement, which is not a big horrible consequence, but a little pat on the wrist, it's a chastisement, does not ultimately work. And that the people have to go through the cataclysm of having the Assyrians and so on. So you describe a natural phenomenon that we vacillate back and forth, we get relaxed, we're not fully committed to our relationship with God and so on. But there's a point at which we go over the edge. And is that a result of, I would say, I would offer two influencers for the catastrophe. One of the influencers is that it's what we would call a natural consequence. This is what happens when you behave this way, is your society collapses. And two, it is that consequence is attributed to God. Two influences, so that the language of the Old Testament always points to God as the one who's sending the catastrophe. But the character of that sending is that God is the creator of the circumstance, which is creation, and continues to create, holds creation in place, and therefore is responsible for the act and consequence. If you're not thoroughly confused, I haven't done my job. So, okay, so you
Yeah,
I,
yeah. The God created. If we screw it up, the result isn't of God's doing. God created a consequence that would be the result of us
Yes,
screwing it
yes,
up.
it's not God's doing, but the Bible blames him.
Oh, yeah.
The Bible calls it God's wrath,
Yeah,
when in fact it
judgment,
is
God's judgment.
judge. It's really just the result of something that's already set up in nature. We're back to the Lazarus effect.
Well,
You
it's
know
set up
that.
in nature, but the human beings have screwed it up, and we are anti-creational, which is another way of putting this is that the consequence is a flooding back in of the uncreated order. Let's go to the 6th chapter of Genesis and to Noah. Right after the creation stories, boom, you've got this flood, this catastrophe that takes place because the wickedness, the evil of the people is so comprehensive. They are so much, the entire population of the planet is so much in opposition to God's creative work. And they've created something that basically they have brought the whole plan, the whole creation project to a close.
Collapsed on itself.
It's collapsed. So now what do we see? How does the Bible describe the Genesis flood? It's not just so much rain that the earth kind of fills up
It
with
was a
water.
punishment.
wiping the slate clean.
Well, what I was fixing to say is that the description of the flood itself is that the waters come gushing up from beneath the earth. It's like the sewer,
A geyser.
like a geyser coming up. That's the waters below the earth. The waters come down in the form of rain. That's the waters from above the earth. See, the Bible uses creational language to describe this, is that the evil of the people has a natural consequence of creating this reversal of creation. And that's the flood. Now, there mapped upon that is the story of this one person who is different, and that's Noah. And Noah, seemingly single-handedly, but in some kind of partnership with God, does an incredible one person faithful effort to save the creation. And we know what he does. He builds the ark and he saves the animals. The animals are involved there. And at length, the flood waters recede. Creation seems to get its footing again after comprehensive destruction. And about Noah, it is written, and I think it's the only person in the Bible, it is said that this is what a righteous man looks like, is that he completely fulfills his creational responsibility with God.
Oh, and that's pre-Judaism.
Please say that again.
Pre-Judaism.
Pre-Judaism.
Well, before Abraham, you mean?
Yes. I'll be real technical and say Judaism really doesn't technically start until after the
Destruction of the Second Temple.
not possibly it comes with Ezra and in the Persian. That's kind of technical. It's always hard for me to guess. What do we call? Do we call the people in the Exodus? Are they the Hebrew children? Or are they the Israelites? I should pay more attention.
But the Jews didn't bring it on themselves in beginning of Exodus. They were a righteous people whom
Didn't bring what on themselves?
Enslavement.
they didn't bring enslavement. Remember the foreigners attempted to kill all the males. And the midwives,
With foreigners, the Egyptians.
the Egyptians, enslaved them. It wasn't the Jews doing it to themselves, it was done to them.
Right.
And it was
Everybody's.
back to the if.
Everybody's in the created order. The Egyptians are part of creation. Everybody's within God's view of things, although there seems to be the beginnings of a particular servant people. And I won't use the word Israelites, we'll use the word servant people, whose task, according to their forebear Abraham, is to be a blessing to all of humanity. So that's underway, and they're popping out children, boom, boom, boom. They're fulfilling their righteousness is in part their fertility, is that they're expanding, and that creational success in Egypt is not exactly celebrated by Egypt because they're not with that
Same
project,
page, no.
right? So they oppress them. Disturbance in the moral order. Then what happens? Disturbance in the natural order. And you have these plagues. The plagues are what I would call a natural consequence, a uncreational. That's a new word, never been said before. Uncreational consequence. So you have the river turns to blood or something. The Egyptians have probably seen that before in a 1,000-year history.
Red sand.
What's that?
When the Pharaoh asked for an explanation, his court said it's red sand, not blood.
Oh, okay.
So it's not
So they knew what that was. So they had that, but then they had the fleas and the flies and the frogs and the lump on the log and the hole in the bottom of the sea. So you have those are natural kinds of things. I like the frogs. Because the frogs are getting in the mixing bowl, like that's a huge yuck, and then there's piles of frogs, this is the created order. When creation is happy and everybody's happy, the frogs stay in the Nile. When there's a disturbance in the created order, then the frogs are out of the Nile. They can't drink the water. They've got what we would call an ecological disaster, right? We would recognize that as a natural kind of consequence. The Bible calls this the judgment of God. I think creation theology would call it act and consequence, is that the same people who create, now, don't go into your scientific self, stay with the revealed self. It's this injustice and the horrible oppression, this 24/7 work week, the killing of the children, the elevating of the Pharaoh as God, rather than the creator God, as the God. All of those bad, unjust, I mean, Egypt is the paradigm for a bad society. I mean, if you want to learn what evil looks like, just go to Egypt. And that's the deal. So they are in total opposition to God's project. And God's people suffer from that. And the land languishes because of that. That would be, our lingo would be, that's a natural consequence. The Bible, the lingo in the Bible says God sent that. So I'm saying that there's some kind of merger of natural consequence. Sin is its own punishment. The judgment of God is somehow equates to the sin itself. At any rate, this also comes to serve God's purposes, and the people are ejected and end up in the, see, I'm pushing the lesson now. The people end up in the wilderness, and we have the same dynamics operating in the wilderness, maybe in an upside down way. So in Egypt, the people are in a kind of a rich place, a developed empire, and they're languishing. They get ejected, and they get out in the wilderness. They're in an austere, arid desert place, but the creative processes continue and prove to be sufficient, apparently miraculously sufficient to sustain the people. And that sustenance is also a natural process. In other words, go ahead, Phil.
How does this relate to where we are today?
Oh, it's parallel.
I mean, we're dealing
I think that,
with creational issues.
yeah. I think
And
climate
it seems
change
to
is the
me that
judgment of God.
that a lot of these are explanational to respond to what happened at that time
Oh,
in the Bible, let's say.
Yeah.
And then how do we explain what's going on today with the same principles we're talking about?
well, again, I think that to go to climate change, which is what got me started in all of this, I do think climate change is the judgment of God. And I think the closest parallel between the climate problem we have today and what we see in the Bible is in that Genesis flood story.
Yeah.
But
on the other hand,
I don't want to miss you, said
No,
Katie.
I'm not sure that's,
Okay,
mean,
go ahead.
I would argue that, of course, I was in medicine, so I'm science and
Right.
and it seems to me that things react to what we do as humans. And you might say it's judgmental in that we're going to experience the bad things that are coming
Right, but
because of what we do or what we did.
right, I'm saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so our lesson is what?
did you ever try to
Wait a minute, let me,
Pardon me. I think
I mean, are we blaming it on God?
no, we have ourselves to blame, and it appears that, first of all, God is in no way sending climate change, is in no way bringing the creational project to a close, is fighting like crazy to prevent the extinction of humanity and has unfortunately not been able to prevent the extinction of a lot of the animals at this point. And a chief driver of climate change is, in fact, it's not just chemistry or physics. It's not just hydrocarbons getting into the atmosphere. It's greed, and it's
Well,
human.
it's human activity.
It's human activity with a particular emphasis on unfair, greedy activity.
Right.
It's, to put it bluntly,
Human nature or human guidance or
no, it's
human
the-
direction or what?
It's the rich. It's the rich people. It's the rich nations and the rich people in the poor nations that are driving climate change. And it is unbridled. It's unbridled
Unknowingly us.
us.
I mean, we still drive our cars, don't
Right,
we?
right,
I mean, we still have gasoline in our
right,
cars.
right.
We still do things that we destroy property. We throw it in the ocean.
Right. And we've been
So it's
doing-
us that's really doing it, when you come down to it.
It's-
And
it's-
where's that direction coming from?
say that question. Say-
Where is that direction coming from?
It's the character of our society. And which is collectively is sinful. The amount of consumption and greed since the 1980s, which is all in our adulthood, has been, there's this profligate, horrible increase. And then the poor, my wife sends money to a young man in Malawi. And their life goes from pillar to post. I mean, they really suffer for every time, the storms are worse, and they've got cyclones, they call them cyclones, and flooding and rain and everything. They don't have, they're the fifth poorest country in the world. And so
But they don't have control.
no, they don't, but they suffer.
Who does?
Humanity plus God has the potential to reverse this.
But ultimately, what this is all tell you, that God is God and we are not God. And we are trying to take on the role of God many times in the things that we do.
Say more.
In that we think we have the answers to everything. And we think that we are the center of the world. And I think that we see lots of that around, that I know best. I know that God is the
We
one.
being who?
Humanity,
People, mankind.
they think we're always in
You
control.
mean all over the,
all
the-
over the-
everybody,
all
yeah,
over the
the
world. And
humanity.
I think that was the great fall, because if you believe the Garden of Eden, however it happened, I think somewhere along the line initially that we had a choice between following God and following his first admonition to do certain things, which was to eat of the fruit of good and evil. So that we wanted to be like God.
Would there
We
be
wanted to be
creation,
God.
would there be creation without eating the apple?
Well, there was creation already.
Not at the original man and woman, is that right? I mean,
Yes, there
was there
was.
creation
Yes,
before?
the sequence was, we have a first creation story in the first chapter of Genesis, and the second chapter is that interrelation thing. You and I have talked about that, because you and I had a little conversation about that little chart about the interrelationship. And then we move into the Garden of Eden story. And we begin to see some of these principles at work in that admittedly complicated story. And then there's the consequence that comes, which is that poetic section where the snake has to crawl on its belly and the woman has to languish in labor pains, and the man has to struggle to make the ground produce food. Maybe what else happened there? there's the longing between the man and the woman, and of course, they have to cover up all of these consequences because of their disobedience in the Garden of Eden. And then it's pretty soon after that. Well, then we get to the 5th chapter or 6th chapter of Genesis, and we've got a comprehensive, terrible situation where people have basically brought the whole creational project to the brink of dying, essentially, and that's when Moses and presumably and God, but Moses gets a lot of credit for saving it.
Even though he wasn't much of an orator.
No, and he was, then there's that drunken naked scene.
That's right.
Afterwards.
May I?
So,
it's 10 minutes to 11,
okay.
and we're not going to be able to unpack this.
Oh,
I didn't
So,
even get into the book of Job, but
yeah.
So may I, and just consider this, may I ask that this discussion be continued on a regular basis? I think there's a whole lot to unpack. And I wanna add one thought about God being evolving, okay? I think that in the beginning, God, all the pieces were there, that if we were good stewards, these things, if we weren't good stewards of God's creation, then these things, and that's the act and the consequence. And what's so terribly frightening about all of this right now is it's happening to us. It's upon us.
But it has been.
And
going
It
on
has
forever.
been, but it's getting really nasty. And with
You're talking about climate now.
I'm talking about all of it.
Yeah.
But as fast as the media moves, we know about it.
That's
I mean, it's not, we don't read about it in the paper next week.
Mhm.
too much.
well, and
Yeah.
Revelations warns us.
Yeah.
About our consequences and what's gonna happen.
So can we commit to unpacking this for the next couple of weeks? Are you busy?
You're saying to have the class meet?
Yeah.
Let me do this. Let me circulate this. Did everybody receive the email that I sent out last evening?
Yes.
Yeah, I just read it this
But-
morning.
I don't know. Did we?
You did.
Maybe
I
we
sent
didn't.
I sent it.
It was in the newsletter. That's part of it.
No,
He
he
said, wasn't
sent a personal email.
Yes.
Oh, you sent another one?
Yeah,
Okay, first of all, we
yesterday.
have captured everything, all the classes that I've taught, we've captured those and those are available.
Okay,
Okay, I know that this doesn't respond because actually Paul and I have had the same conversation as Paul. After our last run came to an end. This is a collaboration. What I'm trying to do is I want to continue talking about this too. And I have a frustration with, not a big frustration, but I feel burdened to try to get way too many ideas and so on, and I've created this myself. Too many ideas and so on, too little discussion, too little careful examination of the scriptures on the table. I've tried to cruise over this at a high level. That's why this frenetic kind of tone in this class coming from me. And so,
no, it's frustrating.
thank you.
It's frustrating because we're not able to have the time to dig down into it and unpack it
Right.
and put it to rest.
Also,
You won't
I'm
ever
just,
find one.
I'm just learning a lot of this myself. And this is venturesome enough that some people might think that we're straying out of the biblical tradition and Reformed theology, which I'm certain we're not. But
I won't tell.
yeah, well. I'm
Yeah.
So let me take this under, let Eric and I talk about this. Eric had an idea of doing something on Ecclesiastes next. I'm not sure how we might do this. I'm continuing to study creation and a lot of these issues. And there's a huge area that opens up about the nature of God. It was interesting when you made a comment about Paul's comment that was interesting about God evolving. Yeah,
I don't necessarily think that he is evolving. I think it always was. We may be recognizing that it was there.
well, and there's an idea that God evolves in this open and relational theology.
It's worth the discussion.
The other thing that's fascinating to me is that the wilderness evolves. If you look carefully at the wilderness story, so, okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right. We always get there after the bells.
Oh, yeah, you guys go ahead and say something.
Okay,
Did you go to first service?
I did.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not keeping you out of.
No,
No.
no.
Oh, I had a
Oh, but you're-
sense, free will of the entire universe, not just one, individual humans having free will.
Mhm.
The whole universe and the condition of sin as well as individual sins. I mean, individual sins, I do something mean to someone, or the condition of sin even over the whole planet. But you know, I had a friend who was the poster child for fitness and clean living and probably a perfectionist. She had a massive stroke at age 44. I mean, she lives with it, but she said, why did this happen to me? And, you know, it's like, you didn't do anything to deserve this individual horror. In fact, you did everything right, I'm sure. But I said, it's like the condition of free will. Things happen, and maybe if God doesn't intervene. I mean, do people think sometimes God intervenes, but what if he doesn't? And lets the world do its thing? Then we're like,
Then they blame God a lot.
well, they do, yeah, but, anyway, that's. I think
You go,
what-
one of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not a PhD scientist or
Just-
whatever. but-
I just think it's not personal.
Yeah, that's a,
It's
Yeah.
not picking on us, us individually. It's just-
Right.
like Puritans might have said, well, what?
Do
you
I
must
have your
sinned.
email?
You
address?
will before we leave.
So are
You'll-
those today's sheets? or-
Oh, yeah,
That's okay.
here's the handout sheet.
Yeah.
You got
Yeah.
something I could write on?
What these talk about is that recapitulation that the
You can
same
cut
kind
them
of
right
thing that's going on in
Thank you.
yeah. Well, the book of Job is very creational. It's so it's not surprising that you would
This is my life.